If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of 3. Join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth and postnatal recovery, helping you have a wonderful pregnancy and afterbirth experience. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 21, and today we are diving into my top 6 tips to help boost your afterbirth recovery. I am your host, Kath Bequee. I'm a mum of 3 young girls, a physiotherapist for women with 15 years experience, and I have an online community, Fitness Mama, which helps to provide pregnant and new mothers with the exercises, support, and resources they need to move from the overwhelm, the physical aches and pains of pregnancy, the weakness felt after birth, and instead we replace that with the comfort and confidence they need to get their bodies and minds strong again, so that they can get back to doing what they love with a bubba by their side, whether or not that's running around with the kids at the park or running the next marathon. So today, as I said, we are diving into my top 6 tips to help boost your afterbirth recovery. Initially, when I was planning this podcast episode, I thought I would just chat about 3 or 4 tips, but the list kept growing. Anyway, I've managed to condense it down to my top 6 tips today, and hopefully these will give you some easy ideas that you can implement for those early few days and weeks after childbirth. But before I do jump into this episode, I just want to let you know about the Fitness Return to Running program. This 12-week running program is perfect for you if you loved running before you had babies, if you feel you perhaps need support to return to running, or perhaps you've never been a runner but you'd love to give it a try. Or perhaps you're not even a runner or you don't want to run, but you are just keen to kick up your rehab up a notch or 2. So to sign up for this 12-week Fitness Return to Running program, head to fitnessmama.com/running. That's fitnessmama.com/running. And the links are in the show notes. Right, let's get into this episode. So I know everyone is super busy, so I'm just going to get started. The first thing I recommend all mamas do in those first 6 weeks after your bubba is born is to not lift anything heavier than your newborn. So I know this can be really challenging if there's a toddler in the house, but even if not, getting the pram in and out of the car, the pram can weigh so much. But this general rule of thumb, I really do feel that this general rule to not lift anything heavier than your baby for 6 weeks, I feel is super important for those who have had a cesarean delivery, but also if you've had a vaginal delivery. And I feel that perhaps women that have a cesarean delivery do this a bit better, and whether or not that's because they've been told by their doctor not to lift anything. Often as well after a cesarean, women aren't allowed to drive for a few weeks. And the thing with driving is that if you're driving yourself and your newborn around, it probably means you need to take your pram and your heavy nappy bag and everything else that is entailed, the capsule. So that can all weigh so much. So if you've had a vaginal delivery and you're able to drive, women are lifting so much in and out of the car, sometimes on a daily basis. Whereas if you're not allowed to drive, suddenly there's a lot more enforced rest for those 6 weeks. So I sometimes wonder, from the women that I see in the clinic and my postnatal mamas, I sometimes wonder whether or not the cesareans heal or recover physically a bit better because of that first 6 weeks. I feel there's more rest done with those. As a general rule of thumb, like obviously this isn't applying to everyone, but I do find women that have a cesarean delivery do sometimes rest a lot more than those who have a vaginal delivery. And this first 6 weeks, I really do consider the rest phase. This is the recuperation phase. This is the phase where As much horizontal rest is amazing. Lifting is very little, so just your newborn. It can really help with that long-term recovery. I like to think of childbirth. Let's say you have a vaginal delivery, and I'm sure I've said this before, but let's think of your pelvic floor and all those soft tissues that stretch a whole heap. Let's think of them like an elastic band that stretches during childbirth. And now we want that natural recoil to occur as much as possible in those first few weeks, first 6 weeks. And I feel that natural recoil occurs best when we're not putting our body under extra load. So the less we can lift, the more rest we can get in those first 6 weeks is amazing. And obviously sometimes it's not possible to rest. If you've got a toddler in the house, sometimes there's going to be things you just have to do, and that's fine. But just as a general rule of thumb, if you can keep that in your mind. So sometimes if you know you have to drive somewhere, for example, perhaps you can brainstorm with your partner the night before for the pram to go into the boot, the night before they go back to work or something. Just brainstorm as much as you can so that it's not all falling on your shoulders. Anyway, I don't have the magic answer, and I know some of my recommendations are all amazing in the ideal world, and I know sometimes life gets in the way, but if nothing else, hopefully it just gives you a little bit to think about. What can you do in your life to minimize lifting? Okay, second little bit of advice, second top tip from myself is to, in that first few weeks, to really help with your pain relief. So if you've had a vaginal delivery, we want lots of icing of the perineum, lots of icing, lots of horizontal rest. So you might really like some compression around that perineal area. And by compression, it could just be as much as having a nice firm pair of undies and an ice pack and your pad, maternity pad, and that might be enough for you to feel like you're getting a nice little bit of compression. And then if you've had a cesarean delivery, the pain relief is really important. So speak to your healthcare provider about your pain relief options. And another thing for both vaginal and cesarean, I find with pain relief, it's much more comfortable to get out of bed via a log roll. So instead of doing a heave-ho and doing a sit-up out of bed, try rolling onto your side first and then use your arms to push you up into sitting. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, on my Instagram, I've got a couple of demonstrations, if you scroll down, of a log roll to get out of bed. Okay, number 3 tip to help with your postnatal recovery is to have bursts of horizontal rest throughout the day. So again, this might be whether or not you've had a vaginal delivery or a cesarean, but the horizontal rest, again, it's that enforced rest, isn't it? It's amazing for the pelvic floor region because it helps to take that area off gravity by lying down horizontally. It really helps when we're thinking about that elastic band analogy again. If you think about when you're sitting and lying, that elastic band, which is your pelvic floor, is under a bit of load from gravity. Whereas when you lie down, all the gravitational forces are off your pelvic floor so that, let's say, that elastic band that natural recoil can occur a little bit more. So the bursts of horizontal rest throughout the day, this doesn't have to be a really long period. It might even be a 5-minute lie down at 4 o'clock before the crazy witching hour, as they say, or before any toddlers' feed times or dinner time. A quick 5-minute lie down can make a world of difference. This is if you've got any residual aches and pains, but for your pelvic floor function, for your abs, to give your abs a bit of a rest if you've had a cesarean delivery or if you've got any abdominal muscle separation. So it's amazing. And again, in the ideal world, this is perfect. But in reality, I know, being a mum of 3, it can be really hard to find time to lie down during the day. It's a crazy time of our lives, this newborn period. So be kind to yourself. But again, what could you do? Let's brainstorm, maybe with your partner, brainstorm some things that you could do lying down at the end of the day. Whether or not it's reading a quick book to your toddler or breastfeeding. If you can master breastfeed lying down, that can be amazing. But I know I personally didn't master breastfeeding until my third child. So I know that's sometimes easier said than done as well. Okay, so the first tip was to not lift anything heavier than your newborn baby for 6 weeks. The second tip was to ice, or look into your pain relief options. The third tip was to have your bursts of horizontal rest throughout the day. Right, fourth tip is to build up walking slowly. And when I say slowly, I think as I'm getting older and as I've had more children and as I see more women as a physio in this postnatal phase, I think I'm becoming more conservative with my recommendations. So I feel in the first week, walking around the ward at the hospital or, walking around your house for 5 minutes or walking down the road for 5 minutes is heaps. So I recommend, and again, this is a very personal choice and I know this won't be for everyone, but I just feel there's no rush to get into walking. Walking puts a lot of extra load on the pelvic floor, which is all healing. Walking can put a lot of extra load through your abs, which are healing if you've had a cesarean. Walking can take a lot of energy when you're totally depleted in those first few 6 weeks. I always say to my new mums, you've got the rest of your life to get fit again, whereas these first 6 weeks, it's not about building up your strength again, it's about resting and recovering and recuperating and rejuvenating. So I recommend week 1, 5 minutes, week 2, 10 minutes. So this might be 10 minutes a few days a week. Week 3, 15 minutes. Week 4, 20 minutes. You get the gist. 5 minutes extra every week. Week 5, 25 minutes. So that means by the time you get to week 6, you're doing a 30-minute walk. And I think that's fantastic. It's a gradual increase and you can monitor your symptoms along the way. How's your body feeling? How is it managing with the walks? Because if you went out for a 30-minute walk in week 1, for example, it might not be until later in that day or the next day where you feel the effects on your body. And then the other tip with the walking is when you're starting out, I always recommend walking in a loop or a circle, like an oval or around a block, somewhere where you can't get stuck halfway and still have to walk home. So rather than walking 15 minutes somewhere and thinking, I'm exhausted, but then having to walk another 15 minutes home, rather you could walk a loop or a block or a few times. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, with the walking side of things, I know this will be very individual based on your previous level of fitness, but having said that, I think it doesn't matter how fit you were before having a baby. I do still feel, and again, this is my pelvic floor physio side coming out in me, I do feel less is more. Putting less load through the pelvic floor will have greater benefits down the track. So it seems counterproductive, doesn't it, to say boost your recovery by doing less, but that's really how I feel. So, and again, it is individual, and always do consult with your healthcare provider or your own women's health physio that you see regularly if you have any questions at all about your particular situation. Okay, tip number 5, let's start your pelvic floor and core. So pelvic floor in those first few days after having a baby, let's say you had a vaginal delivery, your pelvic floor might be simply lift, relax, and you might only be able to do that a few times. In the early days, it's more about getting that connection between your brain and the muscles. It's not about building up your strength. It's about building up the awareness and building up that brain muscle connection and getting those muscles firing. Because after a vaginal delivery, your nerves can get stretched and sometimes it can be really hard to know what to do. I remember after my first, I was really surprised. Those first few days, I thought, where is my pelvic floor? I don't have any. And it took a few days for me to get that awareness back. So be kind to yourself. Don't be surprised if you can't do a 10-second hold straight after childbirth. But if you can start to do a few gentle lift and releases in those early few days, and obviously if you've had a difficult childbirth or if you've got lots of stitches, or perhaps you've had a 3rd or 4th degree perineal tear, do consult with your healthcare provider just to make sure it's okay for you to start. But generally, as a general rule of thumb, it's okay to start the pelvic floor in those early days, but just don't be surprised if you can't do much. And here again, perhaps less is more in those early days. Do small bursts on a regular basis throughout the day rather than trying to do a 10-second hold that's impossible once a day. Tip number 6, my last tip, would be to start a rehab plan from 6 weeks onwards. So, as I said, the first 6 weeks, I really do think it's all about rest and restoring and recovering. And then from 6 weeks, or perhaps it's a few weeks after that, perhaps it's later, whenever the haze, that newborn fog starts to lift for you, is to start to think, okay, what do I need to do now to achieve my goals? So again, this might be different for everyone. Perhaps your goal is to just be able, is to be able to walk around with your pram around your neighborhood. And that's amazing. So you might want to get started on a gentle walking program to slowly build up your walking endurance. But if your goal is to run a 10K race 6 months after having a baby, you might need a different rehab plan. But whatever your end goal is, in the ideal world, it would be amazing if all women could do some element of pelvic floor and core rehab. Your body has been through so much. Your abdominal muscles have just been stretched for 9 months. Your pelvic floor has been stretched whether or not you've had a vaginal or a cesarean delivery. And I really do feel we deserve to look after our bodies. We deserve to prioritize our rehab. And I like to call it rehab because it's not an instantaneous fix. We can't just suddenly, there's a magical time, 12 weeks has passed, therefore I can start running again. I really do think the way to help boost your afterbirth recovery is to think about your step-by-step rehab plan. And to be honest, this is where I feel most women tend to fall away because obviously it takes time, it takes commitment. It's challenging with all the demands of mum life and newborn life. So whenever you feel you're ready in your life and your situation, for some people it might be 6 weeks, for others it might be 6 months, and you know what, even if it's at 2 years after birth or longer, it's never too late. And this was one of the core reasons I did develop Fit Nest Mama, because I did feel that we just needed that quality online program that women could do in the comfort of their home when their newborn or baby was crawling around or their toddlers climbing all over them. Even if women could only do a 10-minute workout once every few days, it's still better than nothing. So to have that ability to exercise confidently in the home, look, it doesn't suit everyone. I totally get that. But for those who would like to be able to exercise from home and like that convenience, that's why I developed Fit Nest Mama. So there it all is in a nutshell. So top tip number 1 was to not lift anything heavier than your baby for 6 weeks. Tip number 2, after a vaginal delivery, ice, ice, ice. And if you've had a C-section, get onto your pain relief and perhaps get onto that log rolling to get out of bed. And there's a lot more other tips for cesarean section, which I'll go into in another podcast episode soon. Actually, let me know on Instagram if that interests you. Send me a DM at FitNestMama. Okay, third tip would be to try to incorporate bursts of horizontal rest throughout the day. So maybe it's towards the evening, towards the end of the day when your body's starting to feel a bit more tired. And number 4 was build up your walking slowly. Don't leave hospital and go straight for a 30-minute walk. I really do recommend building it up really slowly. So I recommend an extra 5 minutes every week. And tip number 5 is start your pelvic floor and core, even if it's just those little gentle pulses, gentle lifts in those early days before you start to do your longer holds. And episode number 6 is start a rehab plan when you're ready. So from 6 weeks onwards, but when you are ready. And that will be different for everyone. So there you go. Hopefully you found that useful and helpful. I'd love to hear. But before I do sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links at fitnessmama.com/podcast, including how to join our 12-week running plan. So if that interests you, head to fitnessmama.com/running. I'd love to hear from you. Have you had a baby recently? And how have you found your after-birth recovery? Send me a DM at fitnessmama. Have a fabulous day, everyone. And I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.